To sum up the presidency of Andrew Johnson, poor fella, didn't get a lot done. Like I mentioned yesterday, Reconstruction went way past his administration. And so historians will state that really President Andrew Johnson was simply a misfit for the presidency for 5 reasons. Okay, I'm going to give you 5 reasons that historians believe that Andrew Johnson was simply a misfit for the presidency. Now that's, so one definition of misfit is someone that just doesn't behave, right? So I mean this being a misfit, doesn't fit, okay? Number 1, he was a Southerner who did not understand the North. He was a Southerner who did not understand the North. Number 2, he was a Tennessean who had earned the distrust of the South. He was a Tennessean who had earned the distrust of the South. Now, remember I told you that he was against Tennessee seceding from the Union?
He was the only Southern person that was next to the Union in that state.
Yeah. So he was not trusted at all by what? The South, where he came from. So he's a Southerner who doesn't understand the North. He's a Tennessean who did not earn the trust of the South. Number 3, he was a Democrat who was never accepted by the Republicans, even though he supported the North. Right? He was a Democrat that was never accepted by the Republicans. You hear about O.J. Simpson, and during his trial he played the race card, did he not? That he was discriminated against because he was black, if you knew anything about O.J. Simpson's murder trial. And people would say he was the whitest black guy there ever was. The point being is that he was African American, but he never acted African American in any way, shape, or form. Didn't donate to African American charities. They went into his home and replaced pictures that he had on his walls with he and white people, with he and black people prior to detectives coming in. Can you believe that? That's what so what I'm saying by this is if he's a Democrat never accepted by the Republicans, he's a Southerner that was as Republican as you could be. You see what I'm saying? Or a Southerner that was Northern as you could be. So he was stuck in the middle. The North didn't trust him and neither did the South. Okay? That's just an example. So number 4, the 4th reason why he was a misfit for the presidency is he was a president that was never elected. Right? People didn't choose him. Right? People didn't choose him. He took over after the death of Abraham Lincoln. You know another president that suffered that same consequence in recent times?
That dude right there.
Gerald Ford, who replaced Richard Nixon when Nixon resigned under scandal. Ford was never elected by the people. Okay? And so he had a hard time. And the 5th reason why Andrew Jackson was a misfit for the presidency, and this is the simplest of them all, he was simply the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Okay? He was simply...
That's number 4 or 5.
That's 5. He was simply the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. So again, the 5 reasons historians state that President Andrew Johnson was a misfit for the presidency. Number 1, he was a Southerner who did not understand the North. Number 2, he was a Tennessean who had earned the distrust of the South. Number 3, he was a Democrat who was never accepted by the Republicans. Number 4, he was a president that had never been elected by the people. And number 5, he was simply the wrong man in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, as Johnson leaves office, whose responsibility now is it going to become to reconstruct the South? The person that would be replacing him. And who's that going to be? Ulysses S. Grant. Okay, yep, election of 1868. Election of 1868. Lincoln was elected in 1860, right? And then again in 1864, right? And now we're going to the election of 1868. Now, the Republicans, when they were looking for a candidate for president, they wanted to nominate someone that would bring honor back to the presidency. Andrew Johnson didn't bring any honor back to the presidency, and the Republicans wanted somebody to bring honor back. And so the man they chose was Ulysses S. Grant. Again, a man with no political experience. A Civil War hero who was very, very popular with the American people. So the Republicans aren't looking for experience here. What are they looking for? Popularity. Somebody that could make the Union feel good about itself. Elect somebody that they like, that they trust. And so the Republicans nominate General Ulysses S. Grant for the presidency. The man they chose as Grant's running mate was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Schuyler Colfax. Speaker of the House of Representatives, Schuyler Colfax.
That's a weird way to spell Schuyler.
What's that?
That's a weird way to spell Schuyler.
That's how you spell it. Now, the Democratic Party, frankly, kiddos, not much of a chance in this election with somebody as popular as Grant running. Well, they nominate Horatio Seymour, who was a very wealthy former governor of New York. So the Democrats counter by nominating for president Horatio Seymour, who was a very wealthy former governor of New York. And the man that will run with Seymour as vice president will be a former congressman by the name of Francis P. Blair, Jr. of Missouri. Interesting names here, huh? Yep. So, for the Republicans, Grant for president, Schuyler Colfax for vice president. For the Democrats, Horatio Seymour for president, Francis P. Blair, Jr. of Missouri for vice president. Now, this is kind of interesting. This is kind of like this last election we just had between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The popular vote, surprisingly, was very close. About 6 million people voted in this election, and Grant won by just 309,000 votes, or about a 5% margin. So the popular vote was really close. Of the 6 million people that voted, Grant wins by 309,000. Or wins by about 5%. Not a big percentage. But we all know that popular votes, and $1.25, I don't know what it costs now, buy you pop and pop machine, doesn't mean much. It's the electoral votes that count. And Grant crushed Seymour 214 to 80 in the Electoral College. 214 electoral votes for Grant, 80 for Horatio Seymour. And as a result of the election of 1868, General Ulysses S. Grant becomes the 18th President of the United States. And here he is, right here. Ulysses S. Grant becomes the 18th President of the United States.
So can you look at all these and name them, or are you just looking for the closest one that you can
Oh, I
count?
could certainly, I'm not going to test my intelligence, but I can certainly go all the way through his name.
Yeah.
Now, here's how we're going to finish this test material. We're just going to give you a profile on Ulysses S. Grant. Because a lot of the things that happened in his administration had to do with the Indian Wars, right? And so that's going to be a whole new topic on its own. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Grant. And you'll find out that he was not a great Civil War general because he had great things happen to him prior to the Civil War. Actually, he was about as low as you could get in life, in his mind, self-esteem-wise, when he decided to be one of the 75,000 volunteers that joined when Abraham Lincoln asked for those after Fort Sumter. Prior to that, you'll see, I'm going to tell you what his life was like. I think most people think this guy was like this heroic man his entire life and marched into the Civil War and took over and won everything. That necessarily wasn't the truth. So we'll tell you a little about him. First of all, he wasn't born Ulysses S. Grant. He was born Hiram Ulysses Grant on April 27, 1822 in Ohio. So he was not born Ulysses S. Grant. He was born Hiram Ulysses Grant, which is on your ID sheet, on April 27th of 1822 in the state of Ohio. How many people knew that? Anybody know that Grant wasn't born? 1822.
I do know.
Yep, that's right. That's why you're in here. Now, Hiram, as I'll refer to him until we have to make the change, Hiram Ulysses Grant was the oldest of 6 children. He had 2 brothers and 3 sisters, but he was the oldest of the 6, with 2 brothers and 3 sisters. So Hiram Ulysses Grant was the oldest of 6 children. He had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Well, a year after Hiram was born, the Grant family moved to a place called Georgetown, Ohio, where his father owned a tannery and a little bit of farmland. So when Hiram was born, a year after that, the family moved to a place called Georgetown, Ohio, where his father owned a tannery and had some farmland. Well, actually a place that tans and sells hides. Yeah. Now, as a young boy, Hiram Grant became an excellent horseman. And he was so good at riding horses that his father, at a very early age, actually sent him many, many times on business trips to go get supplies or do different things. At a very young age, he was given a lot of responsibility. So as a boy, he became an excellent horseman and was often sent on business trips for his father as a very young boy. Well, he grew up in Georgetown, Ohio. He graduated from elementary school and junior high and finally high school in 1839. Graduated in 1839 from high school in Georgetown, Ohio. That's where he lived his life. And what do you generally do nowadays after high school? A lot of kids like to go to college or go to work or something. Well, Grant's had no money, but he really thought his son was smart enough to go to college. And he had heard that his neighbor's son had been dismissed from the military academy at West Point. So Mr. Grant, Hiram's father, who wanted his kid to go on but couldn't really afford for him to go on, hears through the grapevine that his neighbor's son has been kicked out of West Point. Okay? Well, what does his father ask his local congressman?
You need a
Yeah, is it possible you would appoint my son, Hiram Ulysses Grant, as a replacement for this young man that got kicked out? So his father asked his local congressman if he would appoint Hiram Ulysses Grant to take the place of that young man that got kicked out of the academy. Congressman agreed to do so. But when he appointed him, he screwed up and listed him as Ulysses S. Grant instead of Hiram Ulysses Grant. Well, Hiram did not want to get rejected over a clerical error, so he changed his name to Ulysses S. Grant. That's where it came from.
How do you mess that up, though?
You know, people screw up all the time. This congressman sends his name. Does he know the boy? Really? It's politics. He doesn't know the boy, right? I had a very good friend of mine, a 4-star general, write a letter of recommendation for Andy Denise to get into the Air Force Academy. 4-star. Big deal, right? Does he know Andy Denise?
No.
Whose word does he go on?
Yours.
Mine, because he and I are good friends. He could easily have spelled Andy Denise's name wrong, probably, because he doesn't know him. But he took the time. I get what you're saying, Elizabeth. But this guy just did it, made a clerical error, and listed him on his appointment as Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant did not want to be rejected by West Point over this little clerical error, so he legally changed his name on the spot. Okay, that's some story. Well, during his studies at West Point, Ulysses Grant was listed as a pretty average student. Pretty average student at West Point. Nothing spectacular. Average student. So during his career, he was an average student. He also received some demerits. You know what demerits are? That's in the old days, when I was in elementary school, if you got in trouble, instead of getting a discipline referral and detention, you got a demerit. And if you got so many demerits, then they did something to you. Right? That's the difference. Because now, if you skip class, they give, or skip school, don't they give you ISS or a detention or something? But in a demerit system is when every time you screw up, you get a demerit. And when you get so many demerits, that's the end of it. That's kind of how that works. Well, during his time at West Point, he also received several demerits. You know what he got in trouble for? Now think about the surrender at Appomattox. Really impressed me here. What did he get demerits for at West Point that showed up at Appomattox Courthouse? No? What happened at Appomattox Courthouse?
He wasn't dressed.
Yeah, he was dressed in a private shirt, muddy boots. He got demerits for being untidy, not being very tidy. And that's just the way it was. Some people aren't very tidy. When you show up to Appomattox Courthouse for the surrender of the Civil War and you wear a private shirt and muddy boots, you're not a real tidy person, which is okay. But in West Point, that's something they demand. What else might you get demerits for, get lunch detention for around here?
Skipping homework.
What?
Skipping homework.
Skipping class.
Skipping homework. Well, skipping homework, don't you get ISS mainly for that? But how can you get a detention here? If you get too many
Not getting excused.
tardies, that a girl, tardies. Did you see any students?
Yeah.
Too many tardies. So he got demerits for tardiness. He couldn't get to places on time. So Grant was an average student at West Point, nothing great. He received quite a few demerits for either untidy dress or untidy bunk or whatever, and being tardy. Despite these faults, he did very well in mathematics and geology, and he was incredibly good in horsemanship. So despite his faults at West Point, he was exceptional in mathematics, he was exceptional in geology, and was probably one of the best horsemen they had, horsemanship, in the academy. So he goes to his schooling, and he graduates from West Point in 1843. Graduates in 1843. There were 39 candidates in his graduating class. 39. Anybody want to guess where he finished in class rank? Close, 21st. Yeah, he finished 21st out of 39, which is pretty average, right? That's just kind of how he was.
What year did you graduate?
1843. And he graduated 21st in a class of 39. Well, what happens after you graduate from West Point?
Get married.
You come out and, it's the reason you go. You don't come out as a private, you come out as a what? Officer. And you earn a certain rank depending on how well you did. Well, when he came out of West Point, he was given a commission or rank of second lieutenant. LT period would be good for that. He came out of West Point with the rank of second lieutenant. And then you get stationed somewhere. And he got stationed to an infantry regiment near St. Louis, Missouri. What's an infantry regiment?
People that go on foot.
Archer soldiers on foot. Cavalry is horses, infantry is on foot.
St. Louis, Missouri.
Near St. Louis, Missouri. So, Grant was commissioned as a second lieutenant when he left West Point, and he was stationed to an infantry regiment stationed near St. Louis, Missouri. Well, he goes to Missouri, and he meets his future wife, Julia Dent. When he's in Missouri serving his commission, he meets a young lady by the name of his future wife, actually, Julia Dent. And they fell in love, and he proposed marriage in 1844. That's when he proposed to her, in 1844. So he goes to St. Louis, he meets this lady, Julia Dent, he falls in love with her, and he proposes to her in 1844. No, let's see how long it takes to get married. Now, before they could get married, because normally if you engaged, you married soon afterwards, but before he could get married, where'd he go off to fight? No, not before that. He's a young guy now. What war did he go sent to?
War of 1812.
And after that.
That's last, no.
Mexican War, very good.
Yeah.
So before he could get married to Julia
Mexican
Dent,
War.
they shipped him off for duty during the Mexican War.
Mexican War.
And he didn't have a big, heavy fighting duty in the Mexican War. He served as a quartermaster. Anybody know what that is?
He's basically like an office manager for them while they're overseas. They're
Close.
over where they're at.
Well, kind of. What he did as a quartermaster is he overseed the movement of supplies.
Yeah.
Yeah, in other words, if somebody needed supplies to Buena Vista, he's the one that oversaw and made sure they got the supplies. So he wasn't in the heat of the battle, right? He was a quartermaster in the Mexican War. Well, he served under two generals that we've talked about, though. He served under General Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott, both. He served under both those generals during the Mexican War as a quartermaster, someone that oversaw supplies going from one place to another. Well, finally, after a 4-year engagement, Ulysses and Julia were married in 1844. So it took him 4 years to get married, mainly because of his what? Military career. Okay? So after a 4-year engagement, Ulysses and Julia were formally married in 1848.
Yeah.
And over the next 6 years, the couple had 4 children. So after a 4-year engagement, Ulysses Grant and Julia Dent were married in 1848. And over the next 6